What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
And happy Friday. Welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN, the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Those of you who are listening to us who may not be Catholic, but you've got questions about the Catholic faith, and so you've turned to this program, maybe, to try to get some answers. Well, we can help you with that. We can actually answer that question of yours on today's program. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Outside North America, please dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 58177. Wait for our response, and then when you get that response, text us back with your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may, for some folks, apply. You can also shoot us an email if you prefer that. The address ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. All right, Pedro Quiles is our producer, Matt Kabinski handling phone calls, and Rich Jesse on social media. If you would like to ask a question today via YouTube, we're streaming there right now. Just put your question in the comments box if you would, please. Rich will shoot that to us here in Studio One, and we're off to the races. I might also add, because it is Friday and we've got the weekend straight ahead, you don't want to be ruminating on that question of yours all weekend. My goodness. So get in early. 833-288-EWTN. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing decent, thank you.
Weekend plans for the Anders clan?
Yeah, we're having some out-of-town guests and attending a festival at a local Benedictine monastery.
I think we're going to be going to that.
So
I may see you there.
You might.
Possibly so.
Possibly.
Very good. So we're going to lead off with this one from Kathleen in Appalachian, New York. Hope I got that right. Kathleen says, soon I will be donating my blood. And I was wondering, after I received Christ's body and blood in Holy Communion, is his body and blood and all of its spiritual benefits passed on to those receiving my physical blood? Warm regards, Kathleen in New York.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I really appreciate it. And it's helpful, too, because it helps clarify precisely what the Church says about the doctrine of the real presence. You will sometimes hear... Let me start by reminding you what the doctrine teaches. Right?
Okay.
The doctrine teaches that the substance, and I really emphasize that word substance, the substance of Christ's body and blood are present in the Blessed Sacrament, although the accidents of bread and wine remain. The substance of the bread is transubstantiated into the substance of Christ's body, but the accidents, the appearance, the properties of bread and wine remain, and the properties or accidents of Christ's body are absent. They're not there. Okay, so you just have the substance. And you might say, well, what's substance? Well, philosophically speaking, the substance is whatever it is that makes a certain thing to be the kind of thing that it is. And so there's a lot of things about your appearance or properties that are not substantial in the relevant sense. Like, I'm roughly 5'10". You could chop my legs off and I'd be, 5 feet or something. But it'd still be me.
Yes.
You could dip me in green paint, change my color, rip out my hair, knock out my teeth. You could do a lot of things, and I'd still be substantially me. So all those things are not me, right? Now, if you can just abstract away the concept of pure substance devoid of accident, that's what's there. That's what's there. Now you go, Anders, I've never seen anything like that. That's true, you haven't. So we're talking about a really mysterious idea, a really mysterious mode of substance. So it's correct to say Christ is substantially present. Lots of people say, well, he's physically present. Technically, that's not the right way to say it. Because, see, physical presence suggests all the properties and accidents along for the ride.
Yeah.
Tom Price is physically present to me right now in the studio, but Jesus is substantially present to me in the host, not physical, because I don't have 5'10" and 170 pounds of Jesus. right? I don't have the brown-hairedness of Jesus. I don't have all that comes with physical, right? Furthermore, the church teaches that the substantial presence of Christ endures only as long as the accidents of bread and wine endure. So the moment the Blessed Sacrament ceases to look like bread or wine, you no longer have the substantial presence of Christ. Now, you just do the biology here. Through the process of digestion, how long do you think it looks like bread in your body? Well, I mean, for a certain value of bread, I suppose.
Yeah.
I have a dog, I think, that would not turn his nose up at anything that came out of my intestinal tract. But for most of us, it doesn't have to get too far past the uvula, the waggy thing, in the back of your throat. Not too far past the uvula, and it doesn't look like bread anymore.
Right.
So I can't tell you exactly where in the intestinal tract, but someplace between swallowing and digestion, you no longer have the real presence. You no longer have the real presence, which means that we're not actually metabolizing the divisible, corruptible physical flesh of Jesus the way he was corrupted in the tomb. We're not breaking up his physical body and metabolizing it and assimilating the proteins and fats into my own physiology. We doesn't do that. So, which is to say, when you give blood, you're just giving blood. You're just giving blood. You're not passing along little particles of Jesus.
That's certainly good news. Kathleen, thank you so much for your email, and also thank you for giving blood. A very generous
absolutely.
thing to do. You ever done that, David?
I have done it. I have done it. Yes, I have. And I have gotten dizzy doing it too.
Well, and I think anybody in medicine would say, it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody, but and so I always give out the cookies and the orange juice so you don't get too dizzy.
There is that. Yeah, I've done it many times. Yeah. My wonderful wife Adrienne has done it, and every time she does it, she has some sort of a reaction. So I say, you don't have to do this.
Well, I always appreciate, my parish that I was at for 20 years would regularly host blood drives, and the Knights of Columbus would always come downstairs and do a big bacon and egg, sausage, biscuit cook-up for people who gave blood. It was a super nice way of motivating.
Generosity begets generosity.
That's right.
Gotta love that. Thanks again for your email from New York, Kathleen. In a moment, we're going to be getting to the phones, and we'll talk with Gabriel in Washington, also Bill in Southern California. Lines are open for you, and as we said, because it's a Friday, things tend to get pretty busy, so do call early in the hour, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion on this Friday afternoon with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
Wings is a weekly newsletter that's packed with program information, features, and updates of all that's going on at EWTN. To sign up, go to EWTN.com, click subscribe, enter your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. Get your wings today. It's the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Here's today's quote from Mother Angelica's Perpetual Calendar. I must go further and not only see vestiges of him in creation and his image in my neighbor, but I must do all I can to bear fruit in order to manifest the perfection of God in my daily life, especially his goodness. Mother's spiral-bound Perpetual Calendar features an inspirational message for each day of the year. It's available from the EWTN Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I pray that EWTN News in Depth will help the everyday life of everyday Catholics by bringing them the news that matters to them and helping them to have the information at their fingertips for whatever it is that they need to be able to engage with the world confidently with their faith.
EWTN News in Depth with Montse Alvarado. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Television and Radio.
It's called to communion on this Friday afternoon here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Do call early in the hour so that we can get your call on the air. Hey, let me tell you about a wonderful book now available from EWTN Publishing, Family Faith Under Fire, Practical Answers to Everyday Challenges by Dr. Ray Guarendi. Dr. Ray provides you with sound, practical, and spiritual wisdom and expertise as a clinical psychologist and father of 10. Topics like, what should I do when my adult children aren't living the faith? Dr. Ray lays out ways in which parents can also witness to their beliefs, even in broken marriages. Dr. Ray explains how to respond also when your children's faith is threatened at school or by their peers who maybe don't share your beliefs or mindset. That's a great book. Let Dr. Ray show you how to effectively live your faith and share it convincingly and peacefully with those you love. Here's the title, Family Faith Under Fire, Practical Answers to Everyday Challenges by Dr. Ray Guarendi. It's available now at EWTN's Religious Catalog. Buy Catholic, Shop Catholic. EWTNRC.com. EWTNRC.com. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Gabriel in Washington watching us on YouTube this afternoon. Hey, Gabriel, happy Friday to you. What's on your mind today, sir?
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you taking my call. Hope you're all having a good day.
We
So
are.
I'm not Catholic, so I'll try to articulate this as best as I can. I was reading an article trying to understand what the soul is from the Catholic perspective, and a Catholic apologist made the commentary based on paragraphs 360 to 367 of the Catechism, that the soul and the spirit can be thought of as interchangeable or synonym terms when it comes to man. So the question was, if God is spirit, is he also a soul, an uncreated soul in his case? And if so, does Jesus have two souls since he assumed a human nature in the incarnation?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So let me come at this from a couple different angles. So it is a dogma of the Catholic faith that Christ has two natures and has everything that is essential to a nature. And so the human nature of Christ includes a human soul. There was an ancient Christian heresy called Apollinarianism that alleged that Jesus was basically a human body indwelt by the divine Logos, the divine person, and so that he didn't actually have a human soul. And the fathers of the church rejected that doctrine on the grounds that if the purpose of the incarnation is to heal human nature, then if Christ did not assume the totality of a human nature, he didn't heal the totality of a human nature. And so Gregory of Nazianzus put it this way. He said, whatever is not assumed is not healed. If Jesus doesn't have a human soul, then our human soul isn't healed by Christ. And since it's principally the soul that we're concerned with, I mean, I've got some fungus on my toe it'd be nice to get rid of, but like what I really care about is he going to heal my soul? And if Christ doesn't have a human soul, then my human soul isn't healed. And so, no, he has a human soul. And another interesting corollary is that if he didn't have a human soul, he couldn't die. Right? Because death is the separation of soul from body.
Yes.
So if he didn't have a human soul, he couldn't die.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be death. It'd be something else. I mean, it could be like spoiled meat, but it wouldn't be death.
Okay.
Right? Plus, yeah, and if it was just the Logos animating a human corpse, then the apparent death of Christ would actually be the severing of the divinity from the humanity. That's another entailment. Whereas the Catholic position is that the dead body of Christ, so when Jesus' soul is in the tomb, is descended to the dead, what remains in the tomb, the body of Christ, is still hypostatically united to the Godhead.
Okay.
So the flesh of Christ doesn't cease to be divine just because his soul descends to the dead, right? So a lot of reasons why you got to hold that Jesus has a human soul. Now, when we talk about God being spirit, we are using the term in an analogous way. All right, not a univocal way, not an identical way. When we speak of God being spirit, what we mean by that is that God is immaterial. When you say that Christ is spirit, when you say that humanity has a spirit, you're actually talking about a component of the human personality. So you're referring, it may very well be immaterial, as God is immaterial, but you're indicating something slightly different, okay? Similarly, if I speak about, if I use the word soul to refer to God, what I mean by that is that God is living. That's what I mean by it, okay? when I use the word soul to refer to a human, what I mean is that aspect of a human being in virtue of which they are alive. Now, why is that different from what I said about God? Well, in human beings, the body and soul, the totality of the organism is a composite. I am not one thing as a human being. I am many things packed together, in a coherent unity that I call a human being. Whereas God is metaphysically simple. And so you should not think of God having, he's not like an amoeba that has an outer rim that's permeable by osmosis, and then internal ectoplasm that can admit viruses or whatever surrounding a nucleus, and thinking of God as having soul in that kind of nucleic floating in some sort of divine nucleic acid. That would be to impute division in the divine nature, as if he were a composite. But Catholic doctrine is that God is metaphysically simple. And so when we use terms like soul or spirit of God, we're only using them by analogy, and we're abstracting away from the concept of human soul one particular property, namely the being alive part or the immaterial part, and saying, okay, God's alive is immaterial. But if you want to use a more sort of philosophically precise language, you would just say God's immaterial and God's alive.
Gabriel, is that helpful for you, sir?
It actually is, and I will review this later. But just to clarify, is there something I could read to continue to follow up on this?
Absolutely. So the best deep philosophical explication, both of the inner nature of the Godhead as well as human nature, is in the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas, Book 1. And the first part of the Summa, there is an article on the divine, well, actually, there's several articles on the divine nature that go into things like God's knowledge, the fact of God being alive, God's simplicity. All of those is a separate article in the Summa, as well as a really wonderful treatise on humanity that talks about the division of soul and body and the nature of soul and how all that cashes out philosophically. Yeah. So, Thomas is the go-to guy. Now, if you've never read Aristotle before and you're unfamiliar with hylomorphism, you might want to pick up, say, a good introduction to Thomistic philosophy. I would recommend the book Aquinas by Edward Fazer, best one-volume introduction to most accessible and comprehensive introduction to Aquinas' philosophy that I know. It's a really fantastic book, and you'll get a good bit on the divine nature in there as well. So you might first get Fazer's Aquinas, and then just go straight to the Summa Theologica.
It's all quite subtle, isn't it? It really is.
Well, that's what philosophy. What is philosophy? Well, philosophy, in a sense, is the ability to draw subtle distinctions. It's taking ordinary things and asking abstract questions about them by drawing distinctions. And that's how it works. That's how the discipline works.
Fascinating. Gabriel, thanks so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. Two lines open, 833-288-3986. Call to communion with Dr. David Anders on this Friday afternoon here on EWTN. Glad you're along with us. Here is Bill now in Southern California, listening online, EWTN.com. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today, sir?
Yes, hi, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my question. I have a primary one and just kind of a side question. James 2:24, and I'm sure Dr. Anders is well aware of this, states a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. And I actually looked at 6 Bibles, and 5 of them say essentially the same thing, including the NRSV, the RSV, NAB. Only the NIV changes it to a person is considered righteous by what they do, not by faith alone. Even a grammatical problem there. I'm not sure I fully understand how a Protestant can embrace saved by faith alone in light of the James text. And my question is, am I misunderstanding the term justified, which to me seems essential to salvation? And my second question, a side question, the NIV, is it, in addition to not being syntactically grammatical, is it very biased in its presentation?
Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the question, both of them. Let me answer the second question first. So, probably the best known living English language scholar of the New Testament today is the Anglican Bishop N.T. Wright. He's probably the best, the most widely read household name, respected by biblical scholars and lay people alike. Has just a tremendous reputation. The man's a real genius and incredibly prolific. Writes very scholarly articles, and he also writes, sort of lowbrow stuff for the common people, but highly regarded. Wright, who's not a Catholic, and has some real problems with Catholicism. And it has happened that people like myself have picked up Wright and read him and become Catholic. Wright knows this, and it bugs him. He doesn't like the fact that people become Catholic after reading his works, right? He'd rather they become Anglicans. So I give that by way of preface, because what I'm getting ready to tell you comes not from a prejudiced Catholic, but from somebody who has a dog in the Protestant Catholic fight, okay?
Okay.
N.T. Wright has said about the NIV that it is impossible to understand the mind of the Apostle Paul if you read the NIV.
Wow.
That's what he has said about it, right? That the NIV, in his judgment, is so tendentious in its translation philosophy that it obscures the meaning of the Greek text. And if you look at a list of the translators who work on the NIV, or who worked on the NIV, there's just tons of Calvinists on the list. I went to school with some of them.
Okay.
Right? I mean, they're well-known people in the evangelical world, but they're evangelical Calvinists who composed it. Now, do I think that they are being intentionally misleading? No, of course not. I mean, I think the men of good faith, and women, men of good faith and sincerity, who are truly persuaded that their Calvinistic read of the New Testament is the correct one. National Council of Churches, which is a Protestant umbrella organization, some 70 years ago. National Council of Churches, which is a Protestant umbrella organization, some 70 years ago. It's been updated since then. Not Catholic, but I mean, Catholics use it. There's a Catholic edition of the NRSV.
Yes.
And don't quote me on this, but the standard liturgical text in the Catholic Church in North America is the New American Bible, but I think the NRSV is allowable in some circumstances.
Okay, very good.
I'm not sure about that, but I think it is.
Very good.
So I like that one. Now, how could you be Protestant and read James 2:24 and still hold to the doctrine of faith alone? It's a good question. Well, Luther thought it was quite difficult to do, and so he once said of the book of James, I will not have him in my Bible, and that James is an epistle of straw. He kind of talked out of both sides of his mouth, because he would quote James exegetically as an authority, but he also said some nasty things about the epistle, and clearly it wasn't primary for him. So here's how most Protestants do it. James is obviously, admittedly, thin on exposition. Right, so James does not give you a sort of fully worked out doctrine of justification. I mean, this is just a throwaway line in a polemical context to correct what would seem to be, in James's mind, a misinterpretation of St. Paul. But he's not trying to work out, a complete doctrine of justification. So the principle of biblical hermeneutics that Protestants use is Scripture interprets Scripture, and you let the clearer passage interpret the less clear passage. And from their point of view, I don't agree with them, but from their point of view, the clear teaching of St. Paul is Luther's doctrine of justification. I think that's false, but that's how they see it. And that you let that interpret James, not the other way around. And so there's a long-standing argument within Protestantism about whether you could infer justification from good works. Now, it's never credited on the basis of good works. All Protestants agree that it's credited on faith alone. But there's a significant school of thought in Protestantism that if you're genuinely justified, then you will have good works. The works are the consequent, not the cause of justification, but you could reason backwards. You could reason, if there are good works, well, that fellow must have been antecedently justified. It's called the syllogismus practicus.
Wow.
And Theodore Beza, for example, who was a successor of Calvin in Geneva, was a proponent of the syllogismus practicus. There were Puritans that held the same position, right? That's one of the things about Puritanism was a real heavy emphasis on the moral life, including censuring people that didn't live a moral life, and that was perfectly consistent with their doctrine of justification. Now, there are other Protestants that bite the bullet and come full on antinomian and say, no, you can't infer it from good works. But if you're a Beza kind of guy, James is not a problem for you.
Bill, thanks so much for your call. Hope that's helpful for you on both those questions. In a moment, John in Minnesota, Linda in Idaho. Couple lines open for you. Better grab one right now. 833-288-EWTN for Call to Communion. Stay with us.
This is John Lewis in Rome. Join me for the latest news from the Eternal City on Vatican Insider. Saturday night, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
Planned Parenthood's political stunt of giving away 25 abortions from an RV outside the Democratic National Convention will be remembered. In the aftermath of their cold and callous disregard for the babies, I wondered what kind of people would work for a place that's all about abortion, all about killing helpless preborn children. One of the draws is money. According to Planned Parenthood Great River's recent report, the CEO rakes in well over $300,000. This kingpin of the abortion industry is no stranger to boatloads of cash. Nationally, Planned Parenthood receives nearly $1 billion tax dollars. Yes, that's B as in billion. It's no wonder they can shower their execs with money. My second question is, how can they sleep at night?
Follow us on social media at Life Issues Institute.
EWTN offers the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass live every morning at 8 Eastern and provides you with daily readings to follow along and enrich your experience. To be sure you don't miss out on the daily Mass or to get access to previous recordings, we can send a link to your email inbox every day. It's easy. Visit EWTN.com and click subscribe. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Broadcasting the way, the truth, and the life. This is EWTN.
Coming up Monday on More to Life, the life you were meant to live.
We'll look at how the theology of the body can help you live a more abundant life.
That's Monday on More to Life, 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 Central on EWTN Radio.
Now back to Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Welcome back. It is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Great time for you to call 833-288-EWTN if you've got a question about the Catholic faith. 833-288-3986. We'll get back to it in a moment here. Our friends in the Upper Midwest need to hear from you next week. The great Real Presence Radio will be airing their fall live drive, and that's going to start on Tuesday. So if you're listening to any of their 26 radio stations serving Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Wisconsin, Wyoming, remember to support your EWTN Catholic radio station. And speaking of, let's go to John in Minnesota, listening on the great Real Presence Radio. Hello, John. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hello?
Hi.
Are you answering my question?
Go right ahead, John. You're on the air. What's your question?
Okay. Sorry. My phone's dying here. So, the question is the Roman Catholic Church the only Christian denomination that recognizes and acknowledges marriage as the sacrament?
Thank you. Great question. No. The Roman Catholic Church is not the only ecclesial communion that recognizes marriage as a sacrament. Our Orthodox brothers and sisters also recognize marriage as a sacrament, as do some Anglicans recognize marriage as a sacrament. Now, the real question is who rejects the doctrine that marriage is a sacrament? And that rejection was really put on the books by Martin Luther, who was adamant in his rejection of marriage as a sacrament. And of course, he was followed by the Reformed theologians who studied him, namely John Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli, Martin Bucer, Heinrich Bullinger, and the rest of them. They all rejected the doctrine that marriage is a sacrament, and that for several reasons. So first of all, they, holding as they did to the principle of sola scriptura, they argued that Scripture doesn't explicitly teach it. Now, you know, they've neglected to mention it also doesn't explicitly teach the doctrine of the Trinity either, right? And they're inconsistent in their application of that principle, but that was one argument. But I think what was really the motive for rejecting marriage as a sacrament is because if marriage, adultery is not grounds for civil divorce. Excuse me, adultery is not grounds for divorce, right, for the separation of the bond. The Catholic Church actually does allow civil divorce in some instances, but without actually separating the sacramental union, right? So you can get civilly divorced as a Catholic if your spouse is cheating on you or abusing you. You're just not free to remarry, right? Because the Church still regards you as sacramentally married. And the Protestants didn't like that. They wanted the cuckold party, the wounded person in an adulterous marriage, to have the right to remarry. Right, and so they wanted to be able to sever the bonds of marriage permanently, and open the spouse up to remarriage. And in fact, Calvin was the first Christian minister, maybe in history, who specifically allowed for and presided over divorce and remarriage of Christians in his own communion. And there's a great book on the topic by Robert Kingdon, the late Robert Kingdon, formerly of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, entitled Adultery and Divorce in Calvin's Geneva. And interestingly, I think the first civil divorce that was granted with Calvin's blessing in Geneva was the divorce of Calvin's own brother-in-law. And if memory serves me correct, he accused his wife of adultery. She refused to admit to adultery even under torture. And they granted the divorce anyway. So Calvin's brother-in-law got a divorce from his wife, Calvin's sister-in-law, and was allowed to remarry. And then after that, the floodgates opened, and more and more cases happened. And Kingdon documents the specific historical instances. These are some of the issues that made them want to return marriage to the civil jurisdiction. They admitted that they thought it was a divine institution in the same way that, say, kingship or government is a divine institution, but not sacramental. And so governed by the state and not by the church. They really wanted to break what they thought of as the church's stranglehold over marriage and to return it to the state. And so, that was actually a step in the direction toward secularization. I mean, it was just one, but it was a pretty important one. It's significant because before then, family law was, of course, governed by Catholic ecclesiastical law, since almost everybody in Western Europe was Catholic.
Yeah.
Very few exceptions. The Jewish population was a minority, and they had their own marriage law, but almost everybody else would have been under ecclesiastical law. And so Protestantism opened the door to massively increasing the role that the state would play in human life, even in intimate affairs, in particular in family law. And of course, the motive was Protestant. But in the 18th century, through the era of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and into the 19th century, a secularization became an ideological commitment, to sort of radically remove religion from the realm of the state. And of course, even in Catholic lands, that was promoted as an ideology. And Leo XIII wrote an encyclical rejecting that, the secularization of marriage in the modern world. Title of that encyclical is Arcanum, Arcanum, saying no, even the marriage of non-Christians, Pope Leo thought, has a kind of sacral character to it that is best represented in religious rites, even if they're not Christian.
Wow.
Right. So he was an opponent of the idea of the secularization of marriage, even of non-sacramental marriage. So that's a bit of the history. But anyway, today, Catholics, Orthodox, and some Anglicans continue to regard marriage as a sacrament.
Thanks so much for your call from Minnesota, and we're glad that you're listening on the great Real Presence Radio. It's called to Communion here on EWTN. Last call for your call, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Linda is a first-time caller from Idaho, listening on the great Salt and Light Radio. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm a Catholic convert from the Assemblies of God. My husband is a conservative Baptist pastor. We go to Mass, and then we go to the Protestant church after Mass.
Uh-huh.
I heard several weeks ago, or months ago now, the explanation that Dr. Anders gave on what the real presence is. And I just heard it again today with the woman that called in that was giving blood. Is that it written down any place? Can you give me the name of a book so I can actually get it in print?
Oh, yeah, it was written many places. So there's a magnificent book Now, I have to tell you, it's a little bit on that academic-y side. The prose style is a bit, it's not super user-friendly, but it's very clear in the writing.
Okay.
By Abbot Vonier, Vonier, and the title of the book is The Key to the Doctrine of the Eucharist, and it's an explication of St. Thomas Aquinas' Eucharistic theology. It's just a great little book. But I want to give you a couple other resources that are shorter, and they don't touch on exactly the same topic, but it's going to be something you'd like your husband to see. There's an article at the Catholic website calledtocommunion.com.
Hello. My question is, I'm a divorced Catholic. My husband and I were not married in the Catholic Church, and I still love him, but we're not together because of his alcohol issues. And so if I ever decide that I want to marry, it seems like it's a lot easier for me because I don't have to get an annulment, just a lack of form because I wasn't sacramentally married. It seems like I'm getting an easier deal because I chose to go the wrong route rather than somebody who was sacramentally married. So am I understanding that correctly, that I am free to marry, whereas...
Let me ask you a couple of questions before I can answer.
Okay.
When you were married, were you canonically Catholic at the time?
Yes.
Okay. Then, and you did not have a dispensation from your bishop to marry outside the church?
No, I did not.
Then your marriage is invalid. Your marriage is invalid. And so the process for you to legally marry again in the Catholic Church is most dioceses will even have a form on a website.
Wow.
That is that is an easy peasy declaration of nullity based on defect of form, and it's it's a 30-second thing and you're done, right? So the question, am I having an easier time of it than somebody who's Catholic? Well, and you phrase it like, well, shouldn't it be easier for the Catholic and harder for the person that didn't follow the rules? And let me give you another way of framing this, okay? So one of the most common grounds for annulment, if it's not defect of form, right? One of the most common grounds for annulment would be that people were not psychologically competent to take on the rigorous demands of Catholic married life. And if you're not competent, you can't make that commitment. All right, now let's look at the other case. Let's look at the case, sort of the ideal, which is that you have somebody who is psychologically competent, right? They can achieve a valid marriage. So they're never going to get an annulment because they're capable of getting a valid marriage, and they do follow through, right? Why do it? Like, what's the point of the thing, all right? Well, to begin with, why would you ever take a vow of any kind? I mean, in the secular world, they go, well, marriage is passé. We don't do that anymore. It's, as long as we both shall love, which is, I don't know, till about next Thursday, right? Why take a vow? Because I might change my mind. Well, that's exactly why you take a vow.
Sure.
You take a vow because you might change your mind. You take a vow because it is difficult to persevere. It's hard to do, all right? And when you raise the bar even more, like what's being asked of you is not just cohabitation. Anybody can cohabitate. And you can be each other's throats for 80 years, right? Mm-hmm. You take a vow not just to cohabitate, but to love one another as Christ loved the church and lay down your lives for one another in charity to bring the other soul to God. That's what you're signing up for. That has a supernatural end to it. And you will not get there without the help of grace. Hence the sacramental nature of marriage. So you're tying yourself into a very profound understanding of the meaning of your life, right? When you marry in front of a justice of the peace, you're not committing yourself to any of that. You're literally committing yourself to, well, I guess we'll cohabitate until we don't.
Mm-hmm.
So which one's going to be harder to extricate from?
Yeah, for sure. There you go.
That's not a reason to civilly marry.
Right.
Like aiming for civil marriage is saying, I'm aiming for this world. I'm aiming for bodily pleasure. I'm aiming for convenience. I'm aiming at egocentric concerns, right? if you, I mean, I'm not saying that about you specifically. I mean, maybe you had elevated motives, but I mean, like the nature of the institution, what's being offered to you by a court, is not something transcendent and eternal. They're offering you basically a contract that is no more meaningful than the paper that it's written on, right? I mean, you could invest meaning into it, but intrinsically, they're not asking you to commit to meaning to marry in front of a justice of the peace. They're just asking you to commit to a contract, whereas the church is asking you to invest your entire self.
Susan, we hope that's helpful for you. Thanks so much for your call today. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly with Tracy Sable, the program covers the latest on the court appearance of the 14-year-old Georgia school shooting suspect and his father, the apparent withdrawal of Israeli forces from refugee camps in the West Bank, and also the arrival of Pope Francis to Papua New Guinea in the continuation of his apostolic journey. All that tonight on EWTN News Nightly with Tracy Sable. That's at 9 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and television. Zach is watching us on YouTube this afternoon. Hey, Zach. Zach says, if our tax dollars are given to Planned Parenthood to pay for abortions, aren't we called to not pay taxes since we can't support abortions? I'd appreciate clarity on this. Thank you, Zach on YouTube.
Yeah, I think you'd have a hard time arguing that, given that Christ and St. Paul in the New Testament explicitly teach our moral obligation to pay taxes to the Roman Empire. And what do you think that tax revenue was used for? Well, it was used to desecrate temples and to ravish virgins and to support gladiatorial games and Roman imperialism.
A lot of bad stuff.
And the luxurious life of the Caesars.
Yeah.
So, the tax dollars paid to the civil government of Rome were hardly, to build Catholic hospitals.
Yeah. So there it is. Zach, thanks so much for checking in. Thanks for watching us on YouTube this afternoon. Here's one now from Pete in Florida. Dr. Anders, I've often wondered about this, but I've never found a clear answer. Why was the Last Supper on a Thursday when Passover is observed on a Friday? I thought it might be related to the type of Jew that Jesus was, but this detail is never specified. I asked a priest one time. He said it was because that's the way Jesus wanted it. Yeah, that's okay, but what is the historical connection? That's from Pete in Florida.
So Christ wanted to die on the actual Passover, right, when the lambs are being sacrificed in the temple. So people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of ground zero basic principles of the natural law.
Okay.
And humanity's bound by the natural law, not just because God articulated it to Noah, but because he wrote it into the fabric of our nature, such that it's what's intrinsically good for human beings as spiritual and moral animals, is to pursue, say, their own self-preservation, procreation, life in society, and the freedom to pursue the truth about God and the moral life. I mean, these are kind of the basic principles of the moral law that are written into the fabric of our nature and what are necessary for human flourishing. So they're evident the way, say, in logic, the laws of non-contradiction are evident. I mean, if there is any such thing as morality, it has to be consistent with the basic principles of the natural law.
Okay.
Is the modern state of Israel bound by the elements of the Mosaic Code? Well, no. Keep in mind that the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D., and so there really isn't any provision in the Mosaic Code for anticipating the ongoing sort of Israel as a going concern with the destruction of the Davidic monarchy and the destruction of the temple. Because the way the Old Testament is written, that's sort of the culmination of the whole thing. And it'd be like kind of asking, like, I'm not one of these people that thinks that the United States has some sort of, divine mandate or whatever, but there are people who hold that view and connect it very much to, say, the U.S. Constitution. Imagine if you held that view, that sort of manifest destiny view of the United States, and you said, well, what would that mean if the United States as a political entity ceased to exist and you just had North America? Like, the question almost becomes meaningless. Like once you take away the Constitution, you no longer have the United States. You just have a bunch of different people living on a continent, right? And so yeah, if you want to think about it like by analogy to the U.S. Constitution, the Constitution, as it were, of ancient Israel, is indelibly tied to institutions that no longer exist and can't exist in principle, given in the terms of Judaism, they can't exist in Judaism because they've lost the thread of the Davidic lineage, and they don't have a temple. So what are you going to do? I mean, and that's why historically Judaism as a religion evolved away from that idea and developed. I mean, modern Judaism and the Talmud are a synagogue-based, legal commentary tradition about personal holiness. They're not essentially tied to land and kingship and temple ritual the way Old Testament religion is.
Okay.
Finally, you have friends that believe that to be Christian you have to first be Jewish and give an uncritical assent to the modern state of Israel. I think that is an extremely dangerous ideology, very dangerous ideology on so many counts. So first of all, that's not even what the Old Testament says. That's not even what the Old Testament says. I mean, the Old Testament prophets were the harshest critics of the state of Israel that have ever lived. And the consistent message of the Old Testament prophets was that God was going to take it out on the people of Israel for failing to live righteously. It wasn't a kind of uncritical acceptance of monarchy or temple ritual or anything. I mean, and God repudiates the temple in the Old Testament and the monarchy and the people, right? He says, I'm going to be faithful to you, but not like this, not like this. So no uncritical acceptance. Secondly, the modern state of Israel is not, as I just emphasized, is not in a kind of continuity, direct continuity with ancient Israel. I mean, the modern state of Israel is a modern creation, kind of an amazing one. I mean, it's sort of astonishing. You could build a nation from scratch in 1948 and recreate an ancient language from scratch. That's the real how modern Hebrew came to exist is unbelievable. Imagine if, like, all the Catholics in the world said, we're going to create a Catholic state, and Latin is going to be the spoken language.
Oh boy!
And so we're going to get linguists to work, and we're going to create, words for, like, internet and microprocessor, and Hubble Space Telescope.
Refrigerator.
We're going to come up with new Latin words for all of these things.
Oh boy!
And then everyone from the kindergarten class all the way up to the scientific establishment is going to speak it and pull it off. It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable, right? But apart from that, it is a make it from scratch kind of entity. It's not in historical continuity.
Okay.
Even the ancient state was criticized by God himself. And the idea that Christians should give uncritical acceptance to any human institution is just, to me, that's just crazy, right? Because that's certainly not what Christ calls us to at all. Yeah. And you risk, making yourself just an absolute target of manipulation, and that is a setup for tyranny, right? Not for justice. So, the Christian position is that the kingdom of God is not of this world. It's not tied to any political entity or social institution. And the church is where the kingdom of God is made manifest, but even the church is not identical to the kingdom of God, and there are definitely things the church does that can certainly be criticized a fortiori the state of Israel. So no, Israel is a modern political entity that has it's a Jewish identity, but their laws are not explicitly religious, and they should be judged by the standards of international law and natural law like any other civilization. If they do evil, then they're accountable for that evil.
All right. And Carolyn, thank you so much for those great questions. We're going to close with this one from Nick watching us on YouTube today. Aren't priests and deacons officers of the state as well as religious figures as it pertains to the sacrament of marriage?
Okay, so you're talking about the United States. So in our country, the way our civil marriage law works is that in our civil marriage law, most states allow religious ministers to officiate over ceremonies that will be recognized by the state, right? So they work in concert with the state. So sacramental marriages in the United States are generally also recognized as civil institutions, But traditionally, you also have to go down and get that marriage license from the courthouse, or at least hand them a copy of your marriage contract.
So they would not be officers of the state?
Except in a very extended sense.
Okay. Okay, very good. Nick, thanks for watching us on YouTube. Dr. David Anders, have a great weekend.
Thank you, Tom.
Don't forget, we do this program Monday through Friday right here on EWTN at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So do check out the podcast as well. If there was something on today's program that you heard, you want to hear it again, go to EWTN.com. On behalf of our great team, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders. See you Monday. Have a great weekend. God bless.
Ave Maria in the afternoon with Dr. Marcus Peter, an engaging take on the church, culture, and current events.
Hi, I'm Marcus